Ever get the feeling that what happens, like way over there, on the other side of the world can actually affect you here at home?
Mm.
Well, today we're going to do a deep dive into exactly that.
Okay.
We're going to look at Trump's recent win and what it might mean for Africa and Europe.
Right.
And we're basing this on a pretty interesting analysis from Traveling with Elaine on YouTube.
Yeah. It's easy to hear that America First slogan and kind of think, oh, well, that only affects America, right?
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, even when it seems like the U.S. is focusing inward, their actions in the world, their foreign policy, it creates these ripples
Yeah.
that impact everybody.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
economic, security, even culture are all kind of tied together by these invisible strings.
Okay, so let's follow those strings and see where they lead us in this deep dive.
Right.
What are the big things that people in Africa and Europe should be looking out for?
Right.
Who comes out ahead? Who might struggle? And what does it all mean for the average person?
Well, let's start with Africa. It's a huge continent, so much diversity.
Yeah.
Even within Africa, the impact of Trump's policies is going to be different everywhere.
Right.
So, for example, think about the African Growth and Opportunity Act,
Okay.
or AGO, as it's called.
AGO, right.
It's been a major boost for a lot of African economies because it lets certain products enter the U.S. market without all those extra taxes.
Right, AGOA, yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah.
So what changes with the Trump administration in the White House?
Well, Trump has said before that he prefers these bilateral deals.
Okay.
Meaning, agreements that are made one-on-one with individual countries.
Individual countries.
This could be really good news for a place like Nigeria.
Right.
They've got a lot of oil. A direct deal with the U.S. could be very profitable.
Wow.
But for other countries that rely really heavily on AGOA for things like exporting textiles,
Okay.
things could actually get tougher.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Lesotho, for example, they depend a lot on AGOA for their textile industry. They could face job losses without it.
So even within Africa, there are winners and losers just from that one policy shift.
Yeah.
That's fascinating, but also kind of worrying, isn't it?
Yeah.
What can a country like Lesotho even do if they lose access to that U.S. market?
Well, that's where things get even more complicated.
Yeah.
They could try to find new markets for their goods, maybe focus on attracting investments in other areas
Okay.
besides textiles. It's a tough spot to be in for sure,
Yeah.
but it just highlights how interconnected global trade really is.
It really is.
Yeah.
Okay, so trade's one big piece of the puzzle, but what about security?
Oh, yeah.
The U.S. has a military presence in a few African countries.
Mm-hmm.
They're helping with things like counterterrorism efforts.
Right.
What happens if Trump makes moves to reduce spending overseas?
Well, that's where this idea, a power vacuum, comes into play.
Okay.
It's kind of a political science-y term.
Okay.
But basically it means if the U.S. steps back, somebody else is probably going to step in. And that somebody else could be another country trying to exert its influence.
Okay.
Maybe China, maybe Russia.
So not only could these African nations lose this vital support for their own security,
Right.
but it could also shift the entire balance of power in the region.
Exactly.
And we could see new alliances and relationships that we can't even predict right now.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that those power vacuums,
Mm-hmm.
they can be dangerous places.
Yeah.
Think about what happened in Somalia in the 90s.
Right.
Or the challenges that they're facing in the Sahel region right now.
Exactly.
When there's a lack of stability and leadership, it just creates opportunities for conflict,
For sure.
even for extremist groups, to kind of gain a foothold.
It's almost like a domino effect.
Yeah.
One change triggering a whole cascade of these unforeseen consequences.
That's a great way to put it. And it raises some serious questions about the role the U.S. wants to play in Africa and what impact those choices will have.
Right.
Not just on governments, but on people's everyday lives.
It's-
Yeah. And that idea of unforeseen consequences, like dominoes falling, it really comes into focus when we look at the potential impact on Europe.
Right.
Trump's victory. It doesn't just affect the other side of the Atlantic. It creates these waves that could really shake up the foundation of the European project.
That's something I'm really curious about.
Yeah.
The relationship between Trump and Europe has been, well, shall we say, a bit rocky.
Yeah, a little bit.
Especially in the past, with
Yeah.
all that talk about NATO and Europe needing to pay more for their own defense.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like round two of that debate is about to begin.
It certainly does. And if Trump really doubles down on that Europe needs to step up rhetoric, it could have a ripple effect across the entire continent.
Oh, yeah?
Think about it. European nations might feel this pressure
Yeah.
to pump more money into their defense budgets.
Makes sense.
And that means less money for other things.
Right.
Social programs, infrastructure projects, even those
Yeah.
green initiatives.
Oh, yeah, all those ambitious green initiatives they've been pursuing.
It's gacked. So instead of working together, we could see more tension within NATO itself.
Yeah, that's a real possibility.
I mean, some countries might be more willing or able to increase their military spending than others.
Precisely.
Hmm.
And that's where things get really delicate,
Okay.
especially with Russia watching all of this unfold.
Oh, yeah, they're definitely paying attention.
A divided NATO where countries are bickering over money and commitments.
Yeah.
That's a weaker NATO,
Right.
and that's something Putin's going to be watching very, very closely.
It's like suddenly the stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about budgets anymore.
No.
We're talking about the stability and security of a whole continent.
Exactly.
And then, of course, there's the trade issue.
Right.
We've seen how America First can turn into tariffs.
Yeah.
Those extra taxes on imported goods, Europe has felt that before.
Yeah.
And it seems like we might be headed for a repeat.
Well, the possibility is definitely there.
Yeah.
We could see tariffs slapped back on European goods. Like what kinds of things?
Cars, wine technology, agricultural products, the list goes on and on.
Wow.
And here's the thing about trade wars.
What's that?
They hurt everybody involved.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Imagine those tariffs go into effect. What happens? Europe retaliates with their own tariffs.
Right. Tit for tat.
Prices go up on both sides of the Atlantic. Consumers end up paying more
Yeah.
for the things that they want and need. And ultimately, the global economy takes a hit.
You know, you're making me think about that delicious Italian olive oil I love.
Yeah.
What if it suddenly cost twice as much?
Right.
Or that German car I've been saving up for.
Uh-huh.
Suddenly it's just totally out of reach.
Yeah.
These aren't just abstract economic concepts.
No.
They really hit home when you think about the everyday things we buy and enjoy.
It's those personal impacts that often get lost in the big political debates.
Absolutely.
But beyond the economics, there's also a deeper cultural and political dimension to think about.
Okay.
Trump's style, his rhetoric, it's found an audience in Europe, particularly among those right-wing populist movements
Interesting.
that have been gaining steam in recent years.
Oh, that's interesting. So you're saying that a Trump victory could actually embolden these groups and give them more influence?
It's definitely a possibility.
Hmm.
Think about it. They share a lot of the same ideas, the same talking points.
Like what?
Skepticism of the European Union, concerns about immigration.
Yeah.
This focus on national identity over global cooperation.
Right.
These are themes that resonate with both Trump's base and these European movements.
Okay.
A stronger, more vocal populist movement could make the EU itself less stable.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
More internal conflict and just gridlock.
You know what's striking me is that this isn't just an over-there problem.
Right.
We're seeing these same trends, these same anxieties and divisions
Yeah.
playing out all over the world, even here at home.
It's a global phenomenon.
Makes you wonder, what can we learn from Europe's experience?
Mm-hmm.
Are there lessons to be learned, warning signs that we should be paying attention to?
That's a really insightful point, and perhaps nowhere is that connection more apparent
Okay.
than when we look at the issue of climate change.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
We know Europe has been pushing hard for these green policies,
Right.
for reducing carbon emissions, investing in renewable energy.
Yeah, they're really leading the way.
But Trump has been, well, less enthusiastic about those efforts, to say the least.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly.
So what happens when you have two of the world's most powerful entities
Right.
on opposite sides of the spectrum
Yeah.
when it comes to climate action?
It seems like it would just completely undermine the whole global effort, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Less cooperation, more finger pointing, maybe even some countries backtracking on the commitments they've already made.
Yeah, you're thinking about the Paris Agreement?
Exactly. Europe's still in, but the U.S. pulled out under Trump.
Right.
It's hard to imagine how we're going to tackle this problem,
Yeah.
as big and complex as climate change is,
It's a huge challenge.
without this global unity and cooperation.
It raises a really fundamental question.
Yeah, what's that?
Can the world effectively address these massive global challenges
Right.
when its leading powers are so divided?
On these fundamental issues like climate change.
Exactly. And this isn't just about politics.
Yeah.
It's about the kind of future we're creating
Yeah.
for ourselves and for generations to come.
You've given us a lot to think about,
Yeah.
from trade wars to security concerns the future of the EU.
Mm-hmm.
The health of our planet, it seems like a lot is at stake.
Yeah.
in the wake of this election.
It does.
It's almost overwhelming to think about.
Yeah.
But it's clear that what happens in the next few years is going to have ripple effects that'll be felt all over the world.
Absolutely. And perhaps the most important takeaway is this.
Okay.
We're not just passive observers in all of this.
We're not.
The choices we make, the leaders we support, the policies we advocate for,
Right.
they all have consequences.
Right.
We have a responsibility to engage, to stay informed, and to use our voices to shape the kind of world that we want to live in.
You know, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And a little bit frightening how connected everything is. We started talking about Trump's policies.
Right.
And now we're discussing the fate of entire continents and the future of our planet.
It's true. Sometimes it feels like we're standing at a crossroads, you know?
Yeah.
And decisions that we make in the next few years will have these consequences that could last for decades.
Out of everything we talked about today, what worries you the most? What's that potential outcome that keeps you up at night?
The question that really haunts me is, will Africa and Europe be able to navigate all these changes and find ways to not just survive, but thrive?
Right.
Or are they going to get caught in the undertow of American policy and struggle to overcome all these new challenges?
That's a heavy question.
Yeah, it is.
And there are no easy answers.
No.
I guess it all comes down to how all these different actors, governments, businesses, individuals, how they respond to this shifting landscape.
Exactly. And a lot will depend on their ability to adapt, to forge these new partnerships, maybe even challenge the status quo a little bit.
Right.
Think about it. Maybe this creates an opportunity for African nations to really step up, assert their own priorities, strengthen those regional alliances, and pursue economic strategies that aren't so reliant on the U.S.
It's like that saying, you know, necessity is the mother of invention.
Exact.
Maybe all these challenges will force some creative solutions, some new ways of thinking about development and cooperation.
I hope so, because one thing's for sure.
What's that?
The world is changing, and we're all along for the ride, whether we like it or not.
We are.
But here's the thing, we're not just passengers.
Okay.
We have the power to influence the direction,
Right.
to shape the course of events.
That's a really good reminder.
Yeah.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all these big global challenges.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, for sure.
But we can't afford to just be passive.
Right. We can't check out.
We have to stay engaged, stay informed, and keep pushing for a future that works for everyone,
Absolutely.
no matter where they live.
Well said.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, this has been great.
It's been really eye-opening.
It has.
And it's really shown just how interconnected everything is. And, you know, a true deep dive never really ends, does it?
It doesn't.
It's about asking those tough questions,
All right.
seeking out these different perspectives, and being willing to challenge our own assumptions.
Could not have said it better myself.
And on that note, I want to thank you, our listeners, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going. The future depends on it.